Welcome to the Morning Ritual Podcast, meditations and conversations to set the tone for your day. I'm your host, Lily Balch, and I am joined by my dear friend and collaborator in so many ways, Charlene Huskinson. And we are sitting here in our London studio with Ashka Zasada. Now, Ashka just oozes sensuality, and her work is centered around embodiment, pleasure, and play. She is really passionate about helping others find this aliveness in the everyday. Now, I want to dive into what embodiment looks like, and I want to explore the difference between sensuality and sexuality and the shame that many people carry around this topic. I'm curious how we can normalize and alchemize this shame. And before we get into all of those juicy topics, I just want to give a warm welcome to both Charlene and Ashka. So Charlene, just for our listeners, so you can appreciate this, Charlene is our lights, camera, action girl, and she's an incredible photographer, videographer, and production woman. And she's also a brilliant sound healer, and she runs The Space with me, which is our yoga and sound healing studio here in London. So Charlene has just taken off her production hat and is placing another hat on. So anyways, how are you feeling with your new hat?
Yeah, I need to warm up, but I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm ready.
Good. And then Ashka, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm so happy to have you here. Now, so much of your work is around embodiment. Now, we've thrown this word around on the podcast a few times, and the word sounds kind of like what it means, embodiment, like being in the body. But I'm curious, like what your experience of embodiment is, what your definition, and how you would describe embodiment to somebody who's never heard that term before.
Yeah, thank you. Embodiment, as you have just mentioned, is really our capacity to live and experience our life through our bodies. And as obvious as it may sound, it's actually so many of us have not that embodied experience of life. Right? So we may think that just because we are born in our bodies, we experience and live through our bodies, but that isn't the case for, I would say, majority of people these days. To be in an embodiment is to really live a body-led life. And what I also like to add to it is to come into full self-realization through our bodies. So we really come to experience ourselves in this life through our bodies more than through our minds.
Oh, God, I know. I see it left and right. People just like, and in myself, just living up in the head.
Absolutely.
And like totally disconnected. And I mean, that's why I can have the business that I have, a yoga studio, because it's all about bridging the mind and the body. And people come to the mat every day to do just that. And so with, I'm curious, like with embodiment work, what like practical, tactical things would you do in an embodiment session or embodiment work to get people literally dropping into the body?
So embodied work is very different from any other sort of body work that we sort of know in our culture. So embodiment isn't dance. Embodiment isn't fitness. You can be a world-class athlete and still be absolutely disembodied. You can be an incredible dancer and be totally disembodied and have no relationship to your body. And in fact, anything that's competitive, anything that's performative, often leads to disembodiment, because in order for you to compete or perform, you have to suppress the body's natural impulses, natural signals, and you have to conform rather than be in your own experience. Okay?
Like there's so much pressure and expectations that allows you to like
Yes.
miss your own sensation.
Absolutely. To be in your embodied experience is to be in your own sensation. And to then your capacity to read that sensation, to make sense of that sensation, to translate it, and to act based on that sensation. So it may sound a little bit tricky, and it's a process to really recognize that the language and the dialogue that we develop with our bodies is non-verbal, right? It's a very different relationship that we have with our bodies than we will have with our minds, because there isn't a direct dialogue that's happening that you can immediately recognize what's happening. It's a very intuitive way of knowing yourself. It's based on feeling, it's based on sensation, much slower, deeper, denser. And it's a way of living in the world that has this quality of mystery to it. There's no sort of real urgency. There is that capacity to really be with the unfolding, as opposed to, working and, living from the very urgent place that the mind tends to operate from.
Yeah.
Again, think about embodiment and how to become more embodied. We need to find ways to engage with our embodied experience that doesn't have agenda, that doesn't have real structure, that allows us to drop into our own experience, our own sensation, and see how we can then grow in a relationship to that which we are exploring, through those practices.
Yeah. Charlene and I went to this cute little wellness event last night, and part of this event, the facilitator did this visualization exercise, a little meditation. Yeah. And she had us sit down and visualize our sort of most confident, embodied, in her power woman version of ourselves. And then we merged with them. And then I'm calling her my higher self. My higher self, she was listen to the advice that your higher self is giving you right now. And in that moment, my higher self was you've got all the time in the world. And this reminder that elegance, and I love this definition of elegance. Elegance is when somebody embodies this quality that they have time and space. They're not rushing. There's no force. It's
ease, right?
Ease.
Yeah, grace, ease. Just feels so natural and yummy.
Yeah, and it's a clearer channel for me. When I have a sense of urgency, it totally disconnects me from what I'm feeling.
And, if you are then in your embodied experience and you have this direct felt experience of yourself, someone asked you out and you don't want to go, you feel the contraction in your body. You feel your body going no, I don't really want to do it. And, when we are not in a congruent relationship to our body and we're not listening and we are not able to read those sensations, we may override what our body is telling us in the moment and just go with what our head thinks we should be doing, right? Exactly. So the head has many shoots and the body just knows, and it responds, honestly, once we have done enough work to perhaps undo many layers and conditioning. But then your body will give you a clear answer to whether this is good for you or whether, this is something you really don't want to engage with, right? And then so we can feel the contraction, we can feel the opening, we can feel sense of safety, we can feel the excitement, about the possibility of doing something. And that all can happen in the body, but we need to be able to really read into it, honor it, and then act accordingly, right? But if we aren't connected to our bodies, we operate from the shoots, most people that I work with, at least at the beginning of the embodied journey, are overriding the messages that our body are sending out all the time. And so they are in continuous push-pull with their own experience. They do stuff, but it doesn't feel right. They engage in whatever activity, but it's just not fulfilling. And then suddenly they find that they're living someone else's life. They are never fully present with what is happening because it is not actually what they really want to do.
Yeah, so this embodiment work, getting in the body, listening to the signals of the body can help us live more in alignment with like what we want, who we are, our truth. And that takes so much courage. And I find, and you know, you've mentioned this, is like with women in particular who are so embodied, they know themselves, they're in their power, and they're like, you know, really connected to the senses. And it's sensual. Say it as it is, like a sensual woman gets a lot of judgment.
Absolutely.
And projections. And like you've also mentioned like the difference between sensuality and sexuality, and that a sensual woman is way more intimidating or gets more judgment thrown at them than an overtly sexual woman. Can you like touch on that?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, cool. I find that, you know, a woman who is fully owning her sensuality, meaning that she lives through her senses, through her touch, her smell and taste, like everything that she experiences awakens her. She has got this really beautiful sensual relationship with the environment and life. So everything that she receives through the senses awakens her. There's like, there's constant pleasure that she may experience with just being alive. And that takes a lot of work to arrive at, and also, you know, permission to feel good, you know, in life and to enjoy life. And so I find that women who are in the sensuality often get judged way more than women who are in their performative sexuality, because a woman who's in her sensuality, she's a force of nature. And it triggers something really unnamed, something unexplored in us, something that perhaps we are not allowing ourselves to experience and to express. So when you see a woman in her overtly sexual expression, there's a level of mask and performance to it, and then we can relate to it from that sort of, from that audience sort of, you know, level. We can put our own mask, and it feels sort of safe because there's no real energetic sort of exchange happening with that, apart from just like, oh, I'm admiring her craft almost, right? So it's a very different.
Is that because there's no vulnerability?
There's no vulnerability, but it's also performative. So there does not have that essence of truth. Right? And when we see a woman who's in her truth, who's unapologetic about it, and she feels it, and she expresses through her movement, through her breath, you know, through her laughter that's loud, and she takes up space, and then she doesn't, you know, she fully owns her pleasure and her right to be here and now, that can be deeply triggering, because suddenly those who aren't perhaps allowing themselves that capacity are facing, you know, with their own fear and their own judgment around their own expression, right? So, and that often is then projected onto that sensual woman.
Yeah, and there's like this relationship between pleasure and pain. And like the sensual woman who's in her senses and feeling pleasure, like for herself, not performative, genuine pleasure, she has the capacity to tolerate more pain. So vice versa, the people who are not letting themselves feel pleasure might be afraid of their pain.
Because paradoxically, if you see a woman who's really sensual and fully owning her right to live her life, you know, the way she wants to, is usually a woman who's done a lot of work dealing with pain, dealing with grief, dealing with shame. So all of that happens perhaps behind the door and no one knows about, unless she obviously talks about it. But what you see is the final product of all the work that she's done to arrive at the place when she's actually really enjoying life. So if someone is watching that kind of woman expressing herself, they may think, oh, you know, they will then relate to her pleasure and aliveness from the place of their unintegrated pain, unexpressed pain, unfelt grief. Okay?
One-liner.
What's your one-liner?
Oh man, no pain, Was it?
You gotta feel the heel?
No, you gotta feel
you-
to heal, or no pain, no pleasure.
No pain, no gain. I heard.
Oh, no pain, no pleasure.
Well, I've just made one up.
Oh, sorry.
No pain, no pleasure.
One-liner. No pain, no pleasure, friends.
No pain, no pleasure.
I mean, I talked about it a lot and I wrote about it, and I am hugely interested in sort of pain and pleasure because they exist on the same spectrum. You can't have, deep pleasure without having a capacity to feel pain. So they all coexist on the same spectrum of sensation. So our capacity to open up to difficult emotions, to difficult sensation, increases our capacity to feel pleasure, to feel the sensations of pleasure. But even if you think of someone who's deeply in pain and you feel of someone who's having an orgasm, they literally look the same. If you see a person who's actually in agony and you hear a woman wailing in pleasure, they sound the same. And it's actually, if they are on let's say on the very end of the spectrum, it's like, wow, they are taken by a serious force, right? Because both pull us, to be in that sort of agony and to be in that pleasure requires us to completely let go and feel and express.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I'm not saying that it's amazing to feel that capacity of pain, and we have to, but what it is, usually, to arrive at the place where we can feel those expansive sensations of pleasure, people have done enough work when they were held within the safety of some kind of container where they were able to feel the pain, when they were able to wail and cry and weep on the floor and sort of come into the most intimate relationship with the pain and the grief and everything that they have created a lot of armoring around. So we think we can numb selectively, but we can't. When we learn to numb pain, we numb from pleasure. You can't numb selectively. So the armor we build, or the protection we build, the shield that we, apply to not feel pain, will then prevent us from feeling pleasure. It's the same numbness. Numbness is numbness, right? So when we numb one, we numb everything. When we start to awaken to, so that is the most difficult part of awakening to pleasure, is that women come to my workshops and they're like, I want to awaken in pleasure. I'm going to go to feminine embodiment workshop and we're going to work with pleasure and sensations. And then, yes, we drop into our bodies. I invite women to feel the breath and sensations, and suddenly grief arises. Suddenly pain arises. Suddenly all judgment, suddenly all the feelings that we didn't want to feel arise, but not pleasure. And it's like, but I'm here to feel pleasure and I'm feeling everything else.
Well, I think that we do, most people, everything we're doing is to avoid pain.
Yes, absolutely.
Like that's how we go
Because
through
that's-
life.
Well, pain equals like that being scared of pain as well. Pain equals death, doesn't it? Like if I'm in pain, then it potentially could lead to death.
Yeah.
So that's why we're always trying to avoid it.
To stay safe.
Yeah, but it's like sometimes you do need to just accept, if that's physical pain or emotional pain, you have to accept it, and then it can be what it needs to be. This is crazy because
I've had
it?
5 years ago, I got diagnosed with this autoimmune disease, and it was quite painful in my throat. I don't want to dive too much into this, but anyways, it was like physical pain, which is why I went to the doctors and got this diagnosis. And I was so scared of the pain. I would do anything and everything to avoid it. And it wasn't until probably 3 or 4 years into trying to do anything to avoid this pain where my partner, Johnny, was like, what if you just let yourself really feel it as much as you can? And he's not a yogi, not a therapist, not a meditator. He just is wise. And he was like, why don't you just see how deeply you could feel this and accept it? Like basically be friends with the pain. Because this is an experience
it's
he went through.
It's actually something what people say.
And he had a deep pain that he had to befriend, and then that's how he made it through. So from his own experience, he shared that, and that was my process of befriending this pain, being okay with it being there, and I mean, knock on wood, I don't have that pain right now. I haven't had that pain in over a year. And like, it's because I dropped the fear and the resistance towards it. Like I was adding so many layers.
And extra stress.
Yeah, and extra stress and storytelling around it. So that was a really nice like physical example of me befriending that pain. But I think emotional pain is harder than physical pain.
Of course.
And there's a lot of emotional pain that I still am like, oh, you know, resistant to. So if there's somebody listening who's like, yeah, gosh, I have like so much emotional pain, I don't know where to begin, because I don't feel like I don't have the tools to feel it. Like what would you say?
I mean, any emotional pain is really felt in the body. You can't, emotional pain, if you think about it, is actually felt in the body. It will have some kind of resonance in the body somewhere. So you'll feel the tightening of your stomach, the burning sensation in your heart. There will be, you know, when I work with my clients, they will describe all kinds of ways in which they, you know, once they feel any feeling or any, you know, sort of emotion, it's like, where do you feel it in the body? So there will be part of your body that will quickly respond to that emotion. So the emotional pain is always felt in the body. It's not felt somewhere in the air, but it's because then it's felt in the body, and we are not taught. I don't think anyone is really taught how to feel our bodies and, you know, so emotions in the body. That can feel too much to handle. So if someone doesn't have a capacity to then be in relationship to that pain, we try to numb it and suppress it and push it away, because that sensation then starts to create stories. And then the stories feed the mind. And then the mind starts to come up with ideas of why we feel this and what happened. And that emotional pain starts to grow layers and depths and start to add extra stories in the head. So that's usually what happens. And so when we work with the body, when we work with embodiment, we sort of like stop ourselves from going into the story, and we work with the sensation. And then we go like, what does it need in the moment? How can I move towards that sensation? How can I meet it? And then what does it need? Does it need a little bit of touch, movement, connection, maybe breath? How can I, you know, make this small sensation bigger, wider, more spacious, breathe more life into it, and suddenly you feel like, it has less grip on you. Yeah. Suddenly you grow in relationship to it, and it's like,
what are those pillars of embodiment? Like breath, sound, movement.
Sound, movement, sensation. So you kind of go, you can, you know, release it through breath. You can connect to it through breath, through movement, through touch. You know, you feel the sensation, and then you just grow in relationship to it. And then suddenly 5 minutes later, it's like, it feels a bit lighter. It feels a bit better. I don't need to create any story. I don't need to, you know, go up into my head and like, you know, create any narrative around it. And suddenly I'm like, I can come back to what I'm doing. I can, again, be present with what is. Our body will only allow us to feel only that which we have the capacity for. So oftentimes, if someone is coming to work with me and they really haven't felt the emotions or the sensations for a very long time, there's a level of dissociation, disembodiment, you know, the smallest sensation will be very overwhelming, because it's just already happening in the body in a way that they don't understand. It can feel really strong, but also the fact that we are pushing that sensation down adds that extra layer of resistance, which then feels like too much. So there's like, I often find that those two processes happening. One is the sensation itself, and then the person's desire to suppress it that creates that sort of resistance that then makes the sensation feel a little bit overwhelming. We will only feel a little bit at the beginning, and perhaps working with someone who's experienced in holding space for those experiences is super important, because when the sensation arises, we can pause. We don't have to also allow the sensation to grow into something that's unmanageable. And then you pause, you feel, and you regulate so that you slowly come into relationship with it. You feel it, you regulate it, you neutralize it, you move it through your body, and you go, okay, now I feel safe. That sensation wasn't too much. Next time, you are allowing yourself to feel a little bit more again, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. So you're slowly growing in capacity to feel more and more of sensation in your body, more and more life moving through you, right? Because with each sensation, with each sort of, time you open up the body, you open pathways for that sensation to travel more through your body, to awaken you more fully. So as we start to work, initially we notice that there's parts that we can't feel, that there is, very limited areas in which we can even feel the sensations, and the sensations will usually be.
So our work is really about widening our capacity to feel pain instead of chasing the pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Back to what was our one-liner?
No pain, no pleasure.
No pain, no pleasure.
Yeah. And but I would argue that you can actually work on both simultaneously. So in the work that I have done, in the way that I have been trained, we learn to actually feel the sensations of pleasure, of sensations that are pleasurable, alongside the sensations of pain. So we're developing the capacity to hold both. And that is what makes us very mature, if we are able to hold the tension of the opposites at the same time. So I would argue that if you are really growing in your capacity to feel pain, also have practices that allow you to feel pleasure. Because what often happens, we have enough work around the difficult, the releasing, the pain, the release, the emptying.
Yeah.
But we don't have actually practices that teach us how to feel pleasure. So once you've emptied, what are you actually putting in?
Yeah.
Once you have released, what are you actually imprinting in your system that you want to feel now?
I see that a lot, actually.
Exactly.
It's like the breath work, and there's a release, and it's like this whole chasing of like, oh, look at me, I'm really good at like releasing all this trauma, and which is great, but it's like,
in a way
much?
it feels like that's more active, like I'm doing something.
Yeah.
I'm releasing, where the pleasure is like you receive.
Yeah.
You're taking the back seat and you're receiving
Absolutely.
pleasure, and that is
because
right?
that,
is that right?
That has so much to do with receiving. Yeah. Because with the release, sometimes can feel very like, if you have a lot of tension and you just go and release, there's that sense of emptiness that feels good momentarily. It feels like, I've let go. Now I'm deflated. Now I can relax. It's like, emptiness, great. And then you go back to your life, you do the same shit, bam, 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 and you're back to square one, and like, I need to go and release.
Yeah, you're filling that empty container with the same stuff versus filling it with that pleasurable stuff.
So you're not really changing anything then, are you?
Absolutely. And I see a lot of people really addicted to releasing, and nothing is happening, and no change is really happening because they don't know, and they don't have enough practices to then invite new neural pathways, so to speak, that are associated with pleasure, with receiving, with taking up space. And so they're two different practices. So I would really argue that you have to have both. You have to have practices that allow you to release that tension, but then like, okay, what do I want in my life? And this is often the most difficult question that people can ask themselves. What do I want? Especially as a woman, like, what do I want? Like, I know what I kind of don't want, but like, to claim what I want, and then to do practices that invite that into my system, edgy.
Well, that's what I think, is I think like opening up to receiving pleasure is sometimes uncharted territories. It can be kind of scary and triggering.
Absolutely, because it requires a level of vulnerability, and you have to really, you're open to receive. That means your senses are receptive. And then, you have to trust that whatever then it's penetrating you, it's going to feel good, right? But if there's obviously a level of trauma or past experiences where opening up felt unsafe, you will also not want to open up to receive. But that's why we train ourselves to feel safe receiving. We train ourselves to feel safe to be in a pleasure. So there are two different practices, but I would argue they have to happen simultaneously when I work with people, I'm like, you're doing all this hard work. Make sure that once a week you go and have fun. You go and have pleasure. You do, anything that just makes you feel really good in your system. Not like heavily drinking and, anything.
Yeah, but what really feels good and nourishing.
And nourishing.
Right?
Our ability to savor life is our ability to really be in a pleasure and play. This is a very integrated place at which we arrive. So when you see a child playing, they're fully immersed in whatever they're doing, but they also are quite naive and silly, and they can do things that are potentially dangerous, right? So when we have as we grow older and we mature and we have discernment, we have experience, we know what's right or wrong, we then cultivate that capacity to be fully present, experience life through our senses, but we are not naive or reckless anymore, and we don't do things that perhaps put us or others in danger. We know that if I, get really drunk and do silly things, you're probably going to wake up the next day feeling silly. That's not really wild and free. That's just a little bit reckless and perhaps seeking something in me that wants to forget about who I am and, wants to forget about where I'm at and just be in an experience that isn't, that I don't really fully want to own as well.
Yeah, it's numbing
to
to
some
numbing,
extent, right? So when someone says to me, oh, you're so wild and free, often what they relate to is my capacity to be unapologetically myself.
I mean, I like, what you said about making love to life. And I was thinking about how can we bring this more sensual experiences to the everyday of like really taking time to eat with a sense of mindfulness. Like what are you eating and how does it taste? Because sometimes when I'm eating something naughty and I shouldn't be eating it, if I actually notice the taste, it's actually not that tasty. It's, treat yourself.
Yeah.
But it's like, wait, this is these little moments of making love to life. I think what stops people from doing that, I mean, me included sometimes, and even if we take it to literally making love, it's there could be a lot of shame.
Absolutely.
That is lurking in the shadows that prevents us from fully making love to life and being playful and being embodied and we all want to feel good and we all want to feel confident, alive, and own ourselves, right? But sometimes that feels really, really hard, nearly impossible. And so much of that is due to shame. So I want to switch gears a little bit and focus more on that darker side, that shadow work, that navigating shame. Also, it's eclipse season coming up, solar eclipse, lunar eclipse. And that's a really energetically powerful time to do the shadow work because it's coming up. We're being confronted with that darker stuff. So we might as well get to understand how we can work with it. Because for the longest time, I would try to ignore all the darkness and be like, yeah, I don't get angry. I don't get mad. I'm light. I'm, bullshit.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah. So what do you guys think of when I say shadow work? Also, what if one of these listeners has never heard the term shadow work? What is it?
What is it?
Also love the shadow analogy if you guys want to share that one.
Yeah. So the shadow, as the name suggests, is everything that's stays in the darkness. It's really unknown to us. And anyone who's really interested in any self-development and wants to grow in greater capacity in knowing themselves needs to do a little bit of excavation work. And that requires us to look at our shadow. So shadow is everything that lives in the unconscious. Parts of us that we have denied, parts of us that we have repressed, parts of our personality or expression that we don't really want to look at because those parts in the past, perhaps when we were growing up, were parts that did not bring us the love, their belonging, and the attention that we were seeking. So we feel that if we ever express those parts of ourselves, we will be shamed, we will be ridiculed for. And so we decided that it's best if we just not look at it, keep it in the shadow. We often think of a shadow as something really dark, something really sticky, something like really unlovable, like anger. But actually, often our shadow is the source of our deepest aliveness. There's so many aspects of us in the shadow. It's not just like anger or something really nasty. There's some gorgeous, expressive parts of ourselves that perhaps were not accepted within the culture that we were growing up. Parts of ourselves that are very alive, that perhaps were not accepted within the family system in which we were growing up. So it's not just really something really dark and nasty and those really difficult parts of ourselves, but there's so much incredible material that if we can bring to light and integrate into our wholeness, and actually is the greatest source of renewal and aliveness.
How do you find your shadow, right?
Well, first, I think through, listening to those sort of conversations on getting interested, it's like, oh, there's something like shadow. What is this shadow? Because when we are not living a fully integrated whole self, that means, that we do not have those parts that are in the shadow continuously enlivening us, there's always something missing in our lives. We always feel like I'm not really fully living my life, or like I'm here, but like I'm not really here. I'm not living my purpose.
There's a part of me that's left behind.
There is so often what people find, they're having the same triggers happening all the time. They're having the same arguments happening with, in relationships. They're repeating the same patterns over and over. The same shit happens over and over, and they don't really know why. What's happening? What is that part of them that is actually contributing?
There's a part of them that is not integrated.
That is not integrated.
There's that analogy of like the shining a light.
Yeah.
Like, when the light is really dim, your shadow is going to be really long and dark. And then like bringing the light right on top, shining a light on top of that shadow, it gets integrated into your body.
Absolutely.
And I think that's such a wonderful example.
Absolutely. So the best way to notice whether you are not integrating parts of you and you are not sort of owning your shadow is to notice how much you judge everyone else, or how much you then project your own shadow, because that's how it is. Basically, shadow comes into life by being projected on everyone else. So whatever I don't own in myself, whatever desires I don't own, whatever fears I don't own, whatever emotions I don't own in myself, I would totally project it on everyone else. Everyone else is doing this, or everyone is wrong for doing this, usually. And so...
so that's huge. That's a really
huge.
Tangible takeaway.
Yes, absolutely.
Is look at the ways that you are judging.
Absolutely.
And that will give you a little insight on what's festering in the shadows.
Absolutely, what's festering in the shadows.
I'm really trying to think about even if it's a small judgment that I've had that I could, I don't know. I mean, there could be anything. Like if we go back to the woman who's embodied and sensual and walking through a room and making maybe like taking up space, being seen, expressing herself fully and wonderfully. There was a time that triggered me, and I would judge that.
Absolutely.
Who does she think she is? She thinks she's all that and a bag of chips, like walking in here. Do you know that saying in England? No, is that an American saying? Of course. Of course chips would be involved in an American saying, and not the French fried chips.
No.
Anyways, I'm like, who does she think she is? And if we took that judgment of this fierce woman that I had, what would that be showing me? That there's parts of me that I'm hiding, like I'm dimming that part of me that's...
Absolutely, but it takes a little bit of self-awareness and a little bit of sort of sitting with it, because it's not very, I think it's really important to name that there's judgment that's kind of unexplained, that you judge a woman who has nothing to do with your life. She's just walking down the street, and suddenly you have those kind of weird feelings about who she is and why you would never do that, and suddenly you feel a little bit better about yourself. So that's usually,
your ego.
When you are not really owning your shadow, you're very much in your ego. It's like, oh, I'm a little bit better than that person or that person. So we very much then operate from that place of like, I'm a little bit, better. So the judgment has that sort of quality of like inflated ego. Because it's also very important to know that it's good to have some judgment in life, and there's discernment where we can, clearly say this is wrong. Like, right, you observe someone and someone is doing something, it's like, actually this is morally wrong, or this is actually really wrong and I should do something about it. I should come up to that person and say, no, you should not be doing this. So I think it's important to recognize it. Then kind of seeing someone do something that stirs up in you those kind of really weird, like emotions and feelings and judgments that really,
Hey, how about envy? And what about envy?
Exactly. And but you would not say it's envy. What you would say is like, but really underneath is envy, but because perhaps you are not allowing yourself to be in that expression. So the judgment is almost like a shield to not feel the true feelings that you have around this that relates to the part of you that perhaps is not, not allowing, yourself to be expressed. Does it make sense? So when you're in that judgment, suddenly like, I don't have to feel everything that I would need to feel in order to then...
Oh, okay, so judgment's like a little shield.
It is like a shield.
It's like, I'll protect you.
Yeah, I'll protect you.
You don't need to feel these...
Absolutely.
The unworthiness and the envy and the whatever other shitty emotions are underneath it.
If you were able to do all the work and then suddenly be like that woman and like go, wow, actually that feels fucking awesome. That feels so good to just do that. And to own my right to, to be in my expression, to be in my pleasure, to dress however I want to walk however I want to.
And the world needs that. The world needs that,
Right.
and the world wants it. Wants embodied women connected to their power, who can really feel into their intuition.
Absolutely.
Like that I think is so needed right now.
Yeah.
It is.
It's
but we
so
are
needed.
Constantly up against, much greater systems that, they don't want us to be in that space.
No, and that is the best thing we could do to rebel.
Because woman who owns her right to her pleasure, you can't fuck with her.
No.
Like literally, you can't.
She's unfuckable.
She's unfuckable. I mean, she's very fuckable. She's very fuckable and unfuckable at the same time. Wow. Yeah.
Goals.
Did you hear that, guys? There's one thing to take away
one thing you
from
hear.
this.
But there is a lot of that stuff in between with women. Like we're pulling other women down and not celebrating other women. So there's that.
Absolutely.
So there's that a lot of that shame because they want to do that, and there's this whole battle that it's not even anything to do with anyone else. It's us against each other sometimes, isn't it? Not celebrating.
Well, what was that thing you said with the ladder yesterday?
What did I say?
By the way, Charlene and I were biking across London at sunset. Yesterday we were biking across London at sunset, going to this wellness event. Charlene's leading the way. I'm right behind her. And we're like talking about what we're going to talk about. And we're like, sensuality, desire, shame, like shadow work, pussy. Like we're just like, actually I didn't scream pussy in London. I kind of wish I did.
We're having a full-blown conversation as we were riding down the road, and then I got to the lights and I was like, what is going on? I'm like, and then we could talk about this, and
it was so funny. But and one thing that you shared yesterday was like something I think you saw in a reel on Instagram, but I loved it, with the boy and the woman and the ladder, bringing people down, bringing people up. What was that?
Yes. Yeah, it was like, so it was a teacher, and he said to one of his students, like, okay, get on this chair. And so she stood on the chair, and then he was like, tried to pull me up. So she was like, I can't. And you could see that it was hard for her to pull him up. So then he grabbed her arm and he pulled her down. He goes, it's easy for people to pull you down though. Yeah. It's easier for people to pull you down than for you to pull people up. So it's like, so you don't try and pull people up. It's like everyone has to, I suppose, is on their own journey.
Stand on your own 2 feet and groundedly, so people can't be pulling you down, because it can be so easy to get pulled down if we fall into that. So going back to the shadow work, and in particular shame, shame is icky and sticky, and like how can we like alchemize that shame and work with it? Also, what's the difference between shame and guilt?
Yeah,
Because that's a big, I
Yeah.
think people get confused.
So guilt is I've done something wrong. When we feel guilty, we know that we have done something that we shouldn't have done perhaps, and it's very much related to it, any action that we have taken.
And it's kind of a good
It's a good
to
thing.
feel.
Actually, it's a really good thing.
It sucks.
To feel good. It feels good if we can feel guilty, because that means we can, course correct. We can go, actually, I can go and say, I'm sorry. And I can do things differently the next time. It means like we have the capacity to self-reflect and see whether our action was the appropriate action that we, in that particular moment. Whilst shame says, I'm wrong.
Instead of I did something wrong.
I did something wrong. I am wrong. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. And my right to be here is kind of like I don't even have the right to be here.
Yeah, you can feel that one, can't you?
Yeah, and it's just really like, and there's this deep sense of shame at the core of who we are. Like, I'm just wrong, right?
And no one gets a free pass, right? We all have
absolutely. Shame. So, with guilt, you can really link it to something, whilst shame hits you at the very core of who you are. It's like, I'm just wrong. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. Whatever I do is just wrong. Whatever, however I am, it's just wrong. And it's really heavy and dark. And some people have, greater sense of shame. Some people have, a bit less of shame. But I would say absolutely everyone is affected by shame to a smaller or greater degree. I can't think of one person that does not feel shame about something, one aspect of themselves, right?
So what do you do if you're in a place where you're like, there's no turning back. I'm horrible. I have so much shame.
Yeah.
What is that? What do you do?
That is, that feels really, it's, that's such a huge question. Because I would say that's the very end of the spectrum. And there'll be some people who will experience it to that degree, but there are smaller sort of levels of shame. And I think it's important to name that. Because when we have perhaps that much level of shame, the choices we make in our lives are quite destructive. Yeah. And so
look at the choices and maybe start changing some of those choices.
So we look at the choices and how we live our lives. Because I feel like if we are able to turn towards shame as a source of transformation, it becomes an incredible tool that if we learn to alchemize can actually really lead to a very expansive and fulfilling life. So what happens
by recognizing it?
Absolutely. So what happens is all the stuff that's in the shadow, when we start to excavate it, when we start to look at it and move towards it, will initially bring a lot of, will bring the sensation of shame. And shame is a very visceral feeling. That's all it is. That has a story attached to it, but it's usually a very visceral feeling of like suddenly feeling really hot. Palpitations, you feel the contraction in your body, you feel your stomach really like just, nausea and like just feeling sick. And there's like this sense of like, I just want to run away. Yeah. I don't want to be here.
Swallow me up.
It's like the rug is just pulled from, out from underneath your feet and you feel really groundless. It's like, completely
lost. So if you're there, it's okay, nervous system regulation
and
needs to happen.
And that is absolutely, we're working with the nervous system. So you move towards those sensations slowly and gradually. So you don't go like, okay, I'm just going to totally expose myself. And because that's usually not a very effective way, but you kind of like allow yourself to feel just a little bit of that shame, feel the sensations, and then you move towards them and you start to work with those sensations Ask what those sensations need. Ask what part of you that feels those sensations need. How can I then perhaps move through my body? How can I turn it into, energy that starts to animate my body as opposed to contract around that sensation? Because usually what happens, that sensation arises and we go, I don't want to feel it. And we contract, we freeze, and we become even smaller, right? So like slowly. So that's one of the things I want to teach, and I teach in my workshops, is when that sensation of shame arises, starts to move it through your body. See if you can give it life, give it expression, give it a little bit more permission to express itself and move. So rather than going up into the stories, see if you can come into, more intimate and expressive, powerful relationship with it. And I had to walk through so much shame. So of course, if someone looks at me now, perhaps they go like, oh, it's easy for her to say because she's this. And if I had her body, and if I looked at her and I hear it all the time, I would also be doing the things she's doing. And in fact, I'm doing all the things that I'm doing because I've worked through so much shame. And it has been a really, really, it took me years. It didn't happen overnight. I didn't just go to one workshop and suddenly I was free of all the shame. There were layers and layers and layers. But what I have learned is that when I stop fearing my shame, because my shame stopped me from doing amazing things in the past when I was
That's what we
younger.
were talking about yesterday, isn't it? It's like that fear of staying in that shame, and then the decisions that you're making from that place of fear is not the decisions that you actually want. And you want connection, or you want these things, but
And so when we start to move towards it, and now we grow in capacity to feel that sensation. When that, sensation arises, we feel the stories that are coming up for us. So I remember one workshop I did and I really felt like I didn't deliver. And afterwards I was like, the shame was unbearable. And I felt like I was being judged, and some people came and they really thought it was shit, even though, majority of people loved it. But there was this one person whose energy I really felt, and I felt like, oh my God. And that for like weeks afterwards, I really sat with this, I'm not good enough. I should have done things differently. And then as I started to move towards it and feel it and sort of really be in relationship to it, I'm like, I'm just going to do another workshop that's just going to blow it. I'm
going to get back on that horse and do it right, baby.
And then I was like, and so what I would have done in the past, I would go like, I don't want to do these workshops anymore.
It would shut you down.
It would shut me down. I'd be like, I'm really not good at it, and like, no, I don't want to go there because I don't want to feel that shame anymore. But this time I was like, whoa, baby, this time I'm going to deliver. And it's true, it took extra work, and like I was really working through my shame, and I was like super focused. I did an amazing workshop, and I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
Like,
so you showed that. What's the one-liner?
Shame became my
feel the fear, but do it anyway.
Yeah, feel the fear and do it anyway.
And then I was like, fuck. Like, I was like, the shit I'm capable of.
Yeah.
And because I was so determined, and I was like, I'm not going to let that shame, stop me in my tracks. I'm not going to let it sort of prevent me from, really accessing my, the most expansive version of myself. And like what I delivered blew my own mind. And then I was like, holy shit, baby, you're amazing.
Well, that's such a nice example of feeling the shame and then alchemizing it.
Absolutely.
Like taking action. And putting effort in.
Absolutely.
I'm sure I know you. You put effort to make that workshop beautiful. You brought your all and you showed shame who's boss. And then that just becomes easier.
Absolutely. And that got
easier.
imprinted into my system. And then so every next workshop, that was my starting point. And of course sometimes, you will have the moments where you don't always deliver the way you want to, but I also, by working through that initial shame, I don't really care anymore. I also allow myself to not fully deliver. So what I have also, through working with my shame, I stopped expecting this much of myself every single time. I now allow myself to make mistakes. Yeah. I know that the shame that I felt was mine, had nothing to do with this person that I have totally created in my head. And so, which was very much linked to past experiences, but also by working through my shame, I know that I will be fully present with what I can do in this moment, and I will give my best, but I'm also absolutely accepting my mistakes, my shortcomings, my flaws, and I really learn to show up as I am.
So that's it, showing up as you are, and like you said, doing your best, because that's all
we can do in this moment, doing my best in this moment. Right, so I do all the preparations.
The energy that I have, the people that I'm with, and the resources that I've got right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something that I'm super passionate about on the Morning Ritual podcast, and why I keep coming back to this show again and again and again, is because I really want to make wellness in general more down to earth and more simplified. Like, I think in recent years, there's a lot of, we're being sold a lot of things. And embodiment's not something you buy. It's not like a magic pill you can pay 500 pounds for and then be in your body, in your power. So much of the genuine work can't be packaged and sold. Yeah. So I want to try to reiterate that this does take work, and it takes time, and there's no magic pill that we can sell you. There's no amount of money involved here, and we're not having this conversation to sell you anything. Yeah. It's purely, it's my intention to share tools and conversations that make you feel more alive and better. Absolutely. In general. Absolutely. And with that, as we were just saying, direction, I love this little quote, direction is more important than speed. So as long as you're facing the direction at where you want to head to, and take little action steps every day or every week or whatever feels like is capable for you, those little steps are way more important, because Ashka didn't get over her shame in a night, in a workot, in a course. No, it's been years. Yes. And will always continue. Absolutely.
And I, even at the beginning of this podcast, I said that this is, for me, it's still a huge, I'm still leaning into my shame. It's an edge for me to do that sort of work, because I'm still working with old stories of will I deliver? Will I say something interesting? Will I, be entertaining? Will I look good enough? Will someone judge me for Y, Z, whatever? So it is.
And by the way, if you've had judgment throughout this podcast, what is that showing about your shadow? I mean, this is great. I hope that you've had some judgment so that you can look behind you and excavate and use that judgment. Yeah, absolutely. I hope you've triggered some people today.
I hope you are really triggered.
No, I'm just kidding. But there is a lot of wisdom that has come from this conversation. I mean, we started with talking about embodiment and what it is to be in the body through the senses, sensuality being something different than sexuality, and how our view of pleasure and pain and how they're so related. And that's been a takeaway. That's been probably the biggest takeaway for me, is that we can widen our capacity for pain simultaneous to pleasure, and can feel both at once. Yeah. So there's been a lot dropped down in this podcast, and I'm sure some of it's landed for our listeners, some of it might not have, and that's okay. And I wanted to just segue to if people wanted to learn more about you and experience your work and learn more about this stuff, what's the best way?
The best way is to find me either through my website, ashkazasada.com, or Instagram, which is Ashka Zasada, I think. I've changed it a couple of times. And I do private work. So I'm a yoga teacher and embodiment teacher, and I do private work. So I work with people within a one-on-one container, and I do workshops for women called the Embodied Feminine. I've been running these events for about 3 years now. And here at this gorgeous studio. And we also, next year, me and Charlene, we will be running a retreat together called the Embodied Feminine. But that's in a year and a half. But
October 2026.
October, yeah.
Cool.
So many women who come to my workshops end up contacting me, and we then work one-on-one. Usually, I would say for about 6 months to 1 year, if not longer. And I just hold space for them to come into the most loving, authentic, deep relationship to their body's experience, and so for them to really become the most truest versions of who they are and stop fearing, being themselves. So if anyone would love to work, just get in touch.
Totally. And we'll include that all in the show notes. So you'll have the link to Ashka's website and Instagram, and we'll keep you posted on that retreat as well. Yeah. So also Charlene and I, we're filming here at the Space, which is our studio in London. So if you are UK-based, London-based, we'll drop a little promo code for a free class. So you can come in and try a class at the Space. So the promo code will be TMR, like the morning ritual, TMR space, SPACE. So I'll include that little promo code in the show notes as well. So you can try a class on us here at the studio. Yeah, amazing. Any final words, ladies?
Yeah, I look forward to more of these conversations. I feel like, they'll be super potent. But thank you.
And as a listener, if you have any questions, any feedback, anything you want more clarity on, just drop me an email. We'll be gathering again, I'm sure, so we can address some of your questions. And let's end the episode the way that we always do, with a full breath in. A complete breath out, and have a lovely day.